Hi, I'm Rob Johnstone with Woodworkers Journal magazine. I just got done designing and building what I'm calling a slab-topped sofa table. It's 30 inches tall. The top is 3 1/4 inches thick. It's all solid lumber. Every bit of it is massive, including the undercarriage. I really enjoyed building this project, and I'm hoping that you'll enjoy watching how I did it. So why don't we show you how? The first thing to do is get your thick, waney-edged lumber. Waney is just a term that describes the live, unfinished edge of a board. I got mine from a local sawmill where there were a few 3-inch thick slabs of ash that were just perfect for this project. After selecting a great looking piece of lumber to make my tabletop, I chose to get rid of the bark on the edges with a draw knife. I could have left the bark on the board, but I think it would have been really hard to keep clean. I did leave some of the sub-bark for a color contrast on the edges. The wood was too wide for my stationary planer, and I don't own a handheld power plane. So it was up to me, my 07 hand plane, and a bit of elbow grease. In truth, even for a less than skilled hand plane guy like myself, getting the tabletop flat and smooth did not take very long. When using thick, waney edge stock like we are right here, it's hard to get accurate pieces because you don't have straight edges to work from. That's why I decided to use a leg template. It will give me 4 identical legs, which is so important with a table, and it'll give me the taper. It's basically a rectilinear piece, but it's 9 3/8 on this end and 6 1/2 on this end, so there's a slight taper to the piece. I'm going to trace this out on my stock. I'm going to use a Sharpie this time because it's easier for you to see on video. I used a circular saw with a straight edge to cut the long angled cut. Next, I used the chop saw to cut the legs square and to length. Not much waste on this cut. Okay, I've found the center of this piece, and now I'm marking the end. I like to use easy measurement, so I just take the distance of the blade, and then that's where I'm going to put the center of my dominoes. I need a line on top in order to line up the domino machine. Next, I clamp the table leg securely to the table to keep it from moving as I cut the mortises for the domino loose tenons. As you can see, these are substantial mortises for large loose tenons. As I mentioned earlier, when you're working with live or waney edge stock, you don't have square edges to measure from. In order to lay out the leg placement accurately, I began by striking a line down the center of the tabletop's bottom face. The legs are placed on the table at 45-degree angles from the center line. Using the chop saw, I made a layout jig of sorts to help me do this accurately. As shown in the drawings of the table, the legs are located at 9 3/8 of an inch from the ends. I marked that spot and then used the layout jig to draw a line that located the outermost edge of the legs. The legs are spaced 2 1/4 inches apart. Again, you can find these dimensions on the drawings. So I made marks 1 1/8 of an inch from the center line and then used the layout jig once again to strike parallel lines to the center line. It's at the intersection of these two lines that I placed the leg. Then I traced around the leg, marking the center of the mortise locations as I went. After extending the mortise location lines and finding and striking a line bisecting the center of the leg mark out, I'm ready to cut these mortises. There are registration marks on the Domino XL's fence that I will use to line up my cuts. I suppose I could have clamped registration blocks to the tabletop, but I had no trouble keeping the cuts where I wanted them. In all of the mortises in this project, I used the wide mortise cutting setting on the machine to allow for a bit of grace when fitting the pieces together. With the mortises properly spaced and located, it's time to move on to making the stretchers. Before you do, mount the legs onto the tabletop. The assembly is upside down so that you can fit the stretchers as you cut them. The stretchers are 3 inches wide and mitered on each end. I cut my stock so that I had a piece remaining to make the faux stretcher ends. Doing it this way means that the grain patterns in the stretchers and their faux ends match up perfectly. Cut the mortises into the ends of the stretchers. They are located in the center of the mitered end, but the cut is registered off the bottom of the domino machine. You'll see why in a minute. To cut the mortises on the faux stretcher ends, clamp a mitered piece of scrap to the table to help hold the piece in place. Then clamp them to the table and cut your mortise. Again, using the upside down leg and tabletop assembly, use spacers clamped to the legs to hold both ends of the stretchers at their proper height. Then mark the legs for their matching mortises. Use a combo square to extend the center line of the mortise and then grab the domino machine. Once again, use the registration marks on the fence of the machine to line up your cut. Use the bottom of the machine set on the spacer to locate the height of the mortise. This matches the cuts you made earlier. One of the challenges with working with extra thick wood like this, it's almost 3¼ inches thick, is that I didn't have a circular saw that could cut all the way through the thickness. I had to cut through in 2 cuts. And I didn't even try to match them up perfectly because my plan was to use a pattern routing bit on this router and cut the second level flush to the first. Now it's time to begin the final sanding of the tabletop. Sanding the veiny edges, my goal was to get them smooth but to leave the color and character intact. I used a larger rotary sander to smooth out the wide face of the tabletop. Having superior dust extraction during this task is such a benefit. I sanded up through the grits until I reached 220 grit. We go from our final sanding to a dry fit where I assembled every piece of the table together. Everything fits perfectly, disassembled it, and now we're ready to do our final glue up and assembly. I won't be clamping the legs, I'll be letting their weight take care of that. There will be a band clamp around everything to tighten it up. First thing to do is to get some glue into the mortises. Okay. A good coat of glue on end grain is essential. Glue up was manageable doing it by myself, but it would have been much better with a person to help me. Tighten the band clamp around the whole assembly, and all you need to do is wait for the glue to cure. After you've finished your glue up, the next step, of course, is finishing. I applied 2 coats of a mixture of 50% orange shellac and 50% regular shellac. Brushed it on twice. When that cured, I wiped on a final coat of polyurethane, oil-based, for added durability. This project was a lot of fun for me to build. I've never worked with heavy-duty lumber like this. If you're going to give it a try, be sure to use the step-by-step instructions and the drawings we've provided.